So this presentation is going to focus on the regulation of information access and use within the two countries of the United Kingdom and China. So I'm going to give a really little brief synopsis of what the UK has for their data protection. So they have what's called the DPA, or the Data Protection Act, and it came down in May of 2018, May 23rd to be exact, and it's a whole country focused set of regulations. So the regulations not only cover what the EU's General Data Protection Act requires, which is individual rights and securities and information, but it also covers intelligence services and criminal justice processes, and it covers what can be transferred and who can hold the data for that long. It's definitely a broad focus for the entire country. It produced a much more centralized data protection system. So it's China's turn. China has what's known as the Information Security Technology and Personal Information Security Specification, shortened to the standard. And the standard is definitely not the normal regulations that you would expect for data privacy. They only focused on three broad principles. The three broad principles are personal information, data transfer, and data management and governance. And the reason it's only focused on broad principles is because the government and the stakeholders have not come to final conclusions on what they want each little subtopic to hold. So they are still in discussions, and that happening, they produced a broad, like I said, the broad principles for government institutions and for companies and the people to look at to start to get an idea of what's going to come. But there are no really specific regulations in this system that say how it is going to be enforced, what are the stipulations, all that kind of stuff. They give some broad outlines in some of the topics on stuff they're going to cover. They give some primary examples, but there is no set regulations yet in place for China that can be legally binding for this standard. So now I'm going to go into why I think the regulations turned out the way they did for each country. So I'm going to start with the United Kingdom. So obviously, as I had mentioned earlier, the United Kingdom has what's known as the DPA, and their country and overall political sphere and their social atmosphere is definitely similar to what we would compare to the US compared to like Africa or China, for example. They're definitely more similar to us, which means that they're definitely an individual, liberty-focused country. So they definitely want to know and protect the individuals and give them the ability to know what's going on. And such, they have definitely focused their DPA on a structure of open government. It seems that that's what they're using this data protection for. So they have given the individuals of the country the opportunity to find out all the information that they're looking for, what organizations and companies have information on them, how much information, what that information is, and an online database. So they have definitely pushed this series of regulations into an open government and a transparent government style form. They can each individual can access an online portal, and there are constantly updates through the Information and Commissioner's Office in the UK, and they are encouraged to provide feedback to the government on if there isn't information that is listed there that they know another company has, or if there's information listed there that they don't think a company has. They are encouraged to contact the government to see what they can do to change that, what the next steps are in reducing the amount of information that is out there for companies to have on them. So it's definitely an interactive focus, and I think that's basically because they are that kind of society. So the population understands that it's an individual country focused. It's not government runs the people in the sense that they have no ability to understand their rights and understand their information. It's definitely more of a collaboration of, we're here to show you that we have information on you, and we want you to know what we have because we want you to help us in fixing our regulations and making sure that it's the best possible that it can be. So China, as I had mentioned earlier, it is not legally binding, and their standard is not legally binding because regulations in the country are not actually legally binding. They are more of a reference point for companies and organizations to follow. So that what they refer to regulations and national standards as interchangeable, which is kind of confusing, but they are used more so as reference documents and guidance documents when it comes to crafting new laws and the government and the stakeholders use those when reviewing and deciding what they want to carry out. So because of that, there's no incentive really for these broad principles to be carried out by the government, at least yet, because they haven't been enacted. So there's no way for them to review really how it's happening and what they need to change. And that's also on part because of the way the government structures. So the fact that they have stakeholders within the government, there's personal interest within the government. So that is very apparent in the fact that the standard is solely focused on the companies. So the way they pushed their standard is they wanted to focus a lot on the company's access to information and ensure that their technological advancements that are what drives their economic status within the world is continuing. So AI is a big thing in China, and they want to continue their AI developments, which is required on personal data because you have to use personal data in order to create lifelike artificial intelligence. So China's main focus was not really on the people in this sense. Their main focus was ensuring that the government still has the ability to give these companies the information that they need, and that all stems from the structure of the government and right down to the base and the people. Even though there are billions and billions and billions of people in China, they understand how the country works. It's a production-driven society. That they understand that the production is what drives the economy, which allows them to be the economic powerhouse that they are. But there's no pushback from the people in the same sense that there is in somewhere like the UK for them to have individual rights and liberties based on their information. There is no such big outcry as much as there is in the UK. I wanted to provide one specific example that actually came up in both of the research texts that I had used. So something that's called informed consent. So in China, this is going to provide basically just the epitome of what the difference between the goals of the two data regulations are. So in China, they created loopholes within their informed consent. So there's something that they call implied or silent consent, which means that the corporations that don't have to receive actual verbal, written, or what they call privacy notices, they don't have to give those out because what the government has created is what's called implied or silent consent. But the UK has taken a bit of a different stance, although it doesn't have to do as much with corporate companies receiving the data and so much how the data is given out. They chose to set their consent age at 13. So there must be verifiable parental consent received to prove that that data is allowed to be shared and given out and transferred. So they took obviously very different approaches. Alright, I'm just going to do a little wrap up of my video. I hope it wasn't too confusing and I hope you could follow it. But just to wrap up, I think the UK from here is only going to have an increase in open data systems. I think that this type of civic engagement that they're using, like the strategy that they're using for this kind of data privacy laws to show them that the government is engaged in getting them to understand the laws and understand what kind of information they have in them is going to increase the desire for citizens to engage in an open data system. As for China, I don't think there's going to be much of a change for the citizens. I think that for the companies, the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to be a little bit better off when it comes to international standards because they're already a little bit up from where they need to be in order to function within international systems without facing penalties. But I don't think for the citizens there is going to be much of a change. I don't think it's going to engage the citizens anymore. I think it's just going to give a pass to the companies because there is no real reliability on the government to ensure there is no push for them to have to do it. So I think the lack of civic engagement is what allows the government to continue on this path.